All right, here we go with chapter 10 on gender stratification and society. How do sociologists look at gender? What's it mean when we have rigid systems, when we have fluid systems? How do people's understanding of the concept of gender or the difference between gender and sex vary? And what's that look like from culture to culture, as well as how does that, what kind of implications does that have on our life chances, and where we're at? So let's get right in here. Is gender inequality a current social problem? Yes, no. Men, women, transgender individuals have the same opportunities. C, not as much as it used to be a few decades ago. Therefore, this should not be a big deal today. Something to get us thinking about gender inequality. Now, if we look at the 1970s, kind of go back in a little bit of a timeline piece, babies born generally given the name of their father. Girls cannot play in little leagues, oftentimes, or other sporting type of leagues. Almost all teachers are female. High school principals and most administration members are male. Females half as likely to qualify for National Merit Scholarship, since most of the questions are indeed gender biased and favor the boys or the gender male. What are some issues women, men, transgender individuals face today? So to get us thinking about gender. And I think that like anything else, race, your age, or ability, there are so many things that get us thinking about that, including like current cultural climates. So what are some issues facing men today, women today, transgender individuals? What are some evolving changes to our gender expectations and roles? Why is it difficult to observe gender stratification today, or in what instances is it easier to observe that? And how is gender stratification reinforced over time? And maybe more importantly or personally, how has gender stratification impacted you during the course of your life so far? All right. Does your gender matter to you? We've asked this question with other things, race, things like that. So does your gender matter to you? Yes, a lot. No, not much. And then really the most important thing, I mean, we do live in a bumper sticker culture, right? Where it's like, beep, beep, this is the person I support, see you later, or visualize world peace, bye-bye. And then we don't really follow that up with the why. So more importantly, does your gender matter to you? Why and how, right? Everybody is a unique individual and has a different experience along those lines. All right. Let's take a look here at some basics, okay? Gender and inequality, and then the difference between gender and sex. So gender, complex interaction between biology and culture and how it shapes behavioral differences associated with gender, right? One thing that we know is that sex does not equal gender. Oftentimes, just like we use race and ethnicity interchangeably, or drugs and alcohol, we do so, but we miss the nuances and the real importance of that definition and how we see it sociologically. So not the same. Gender, when we boil that down, personal traits and social position, or personal traits and social position that members of society attach to being female, male, transgender, and norms, roles, and behaviors associated in a given society with being male, female, or transgender. Sorry, I have transgendered here, but transgender. Sex, then, right? We've got personal traits, social position that members of a society attach importance to. Okay, a lot like race. Sex, though, the anatomical or other biological differences between genders that originate in human genes. Our sex, one way to think of it in a simple way, and then I'll extrapolate later. We've got another video to watch, but sex is what's in your pants, and gender is really more what's in your head, right? If we're going to make kind of an easy distinction, and we'll get into more detailed distinctions. Both sex and gender are fluid, they are dynamic, and they are socially constructed concepts. Now, granted, in this culture, just like so many things are different over generations or over time or throughout the years, look, gender and sex are fluid. They did not used to be, however, right? We understand that 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago in this culture, either or, right? A very binary and only binary system and way to understand, comprehend gender, right? And sex. So now, however, I would say that we have a deeper more meaningful understanding of the idea of what gender represents, just like ethnicity and our concepts of race, which were very rigid at one point, to where we are now. And of course, the reason for that being that society and culture is different, and each generation, each moment in time constructs gender in a different way, right? So that's here where we are in 2020. Transgender, an umbrella term to use to describe all those who identify outside of their assigned sex or outside of the gender binary. So either male or female, this would be those individuals, who identify outside of what they've been assigned. And look, we could look and talk in a whole lecture about just the process by which we go about assigning gender, and how that doesn't really reflect where we're at today, even in the year 2020, even in our hospitals, which we consider to be full of knowledge and using very scientific information. We still find all sorts of ways, particularly around birthing, really, that they could do better. So transsexuals, people who use surgery and hormones to change their sex to match their preferred gender. And I really, really wish that we could get a fantastic group of individuals who are transgender that used to come and speak when I was teaching over at Front Range. Just a really wide range of folks. And I always found it very important that they would come in to a Social 100 class where, look, people are oftentimes don't have that much experience with gender, and just how fluid that can be and what that means to some people. So we have to understand that these different terms are very deep. No one person falls into just one category. And we need to not only celebrate that, but more importantly, look at what that is and what that means to different individuals on a symbolic interactionist type up close level, so that we don't just continue to have misinformation and see things and perceive things in the wrong way, right? Or in ways that are not, I guess, as open and important, filled with substance for people who are not just in a binary sort of mode. Sexuality, the ways in which people construct their sexual desires and relationships, including the norms governing social behavior. And of course, the norms governing social behavior, also very fluid and changing, and like culture, not static. They're very dynamic as well. All right, so culture and society influence gender and our gender roles. The attitudes and behaviors appropriately or considered appropriately masculine or feminine in a particular culture in a particular time. And really whether we act more masculine or feminine has less to do with our biological sex than with the societal gender roles associated with our gender. I always found it so interesting to me as we look at gender roles, just how old-fashioned and old-school gender roles and rigid they really are. My experience raising both of my sons, Storm and Zion, who identify as the gender male, but for a long, long, long time still do have very long hair. And I would have thought when they were born in 2007 and now we're in 2020, that just wouldn't be a hang-up like it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, my dad really wanted to grow my hair out long. My mom thought it would be confusing to people, and of course it was. People would see the long hair, and is he a boy or a girl? And I guess my mom just didn't want to deal with it, so it was snip, snip, snip. In our family, it's express yourself. That's not a hill for me to die on. You can cut it. You can have it long. You can have dreadlocks. You can dye it pink and purple. You can shave your head. Whatever it is that you want to do, you can do with it. But oftentimes, and our boys would be dressed like they'd have like little guns and dressed in camo and superhero outfits. And the gender just kind of rolls just masculine, exuding that kind of thing. But they had long hair. And so frequently people would say, oh, she's just so free-spirited. And she's just so much fun, and really just people working out their own gender issues in real time in front of me as we were on playgrounds when the boys were much younger. And now, that the boys are older, that doesn't cease as far as our expectations. Society still has some pretty old school expectations in regards to gender. All right, this video here, pause my lecture, whatever, copy it and paste it. I think it's a really great, quick in and out about the difference between a binary system and just how much more developed we are in an X and Y axis and not a flat sort of a thing, and really how we can fall many places in a gender spectrum in relationship to sex and gender and where we're at in our head, where we're at in our pants, where we're at with our relationships. So check that out. Really important. All right. Obviously, gender and inequality is a big deal because we have gender stratification, and gender stratification is not something where we say, well, women just don't get a fair shake, transgender individuals don't get a fair shake. We are able to statistically measure, and it's much harder when we look at transgender individuals because of the way that those statistics are able to be released in the first place, how that impacts the safety of an individual, whether that reporting happens or doesn't. So we understand, though, that a lot of inequality has purposefully been set up by our institution in regards to that, statistically measurable and unequal at a rate that is cause for concern, and more so for us as sociologists to dig in deep and change that. So the unequal distribution of wealth, power, and privilege between people of various genders. Culture and society influence gender and gender roles. Certainly, the attitudes and behaviors that some folks consider appropriately masculine or appropriately feminine, and how people break those rules and break down those rules and barrier are also important as well. But people have their built-up expectations, just like we can say it's sociological momentum, or I like to call it habit energy, the same way of thinking of things or going about doing things. The same is true with gender. So whether we act more masculine or feminine has really less to do, like I said, with our biological sex than with society gender rules. All right. More on gender. Gender inequality exists in almost all known societies, just like stratification does based on socioeconomic ideas. And of course, then that has lots of different variables for how that is placed. Same is true past, present, and certainly with the patriarchy or men being favored over women, particularly in this culture. Sociologists know that women alone can give birth to, and before modern bottle feeding, nurse infants. So two essential activities lacking in social status. I mean, those are really huge things, the people that bring life into existence in the first place, and then being able to nurse that child pretty specifically through those roles until now. But two essential activities lacking in social status. And of course, we look at the ability and social status in a modern culture. We don't really think of that as such a high social status as far as birthing and that whole thing as we do maybe income earning, or the ability to earn money is certainly associated with more power, more wealth, and more status, which has profoundly over time impacted a woman's social position and subordinated it if we're to look at what that has been like over time. In hunting and gathering societies, women produced nearly as much food as men. They gathered more food than men. They were more equal oftentimes in power and prestige than modern day cultures, and this modern day culture that we're looking at here. In agricultural societies, trade and warfare become central features of this organization. So you've got women spending years being pregnant or nursing infants. They are less likely over time. There are some basic explanations for why that would be, to be merchants or warriors. And in some cultures, we have more roles associated with masculine or male gender behaviors as far as being involved with that, and then in many, much less. So in industrial society, the requirements of physical survival, reproduction, and economic organization no longer necessarily exert these constraints. So we are now dealing with what we were dealing with for much of history, and how that changed drastically and radically at times, now looking at a much different scenario as well. All right, which have you done more often lately? Or people, if you identify with the gender male, which of these dimensions have most recently done? 44% cried. Just getting to this is kind of an interesting thing. When we talk about gender constraints, look, we know that it is biased and that people who identify with the gender male have more privilege, power, and access. That being said, can you imagine one of the big things that men, when we talk to men about where they feel their constraints lie, is not being able to express emotion. So although we understand the majority of the disadvantage and inequalities fall squarely on the shoulder of transgender individuals and women, we also know that, just imagine that. That's a huge component stripped away from, in many ways, your ability. So 44% cried and consider that something different. 11 changed a tire. 17% drank a girl drink. 28% manscaping, which is just a fantastic term and wasn't around maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Here we are. All right, so what's it mean when we talk about gender roles? These we're going to look at when we look at our questions with the whole class. What does it mean to be masculine? What does it really mean to be feminine? And, in what times do you switch your roles? When are you more feminine or more masculine? And what's that look like? At the end of every single movie even Marvel movies, I am absolutely crying. That's my thing. According to our gender roles here, that might seem like a more feminine trait, but also I can't fix an engine, so I'm likely to cry at the end of most movies. And I'll stand around an engine and look at it. Yep, yep. But I'd better not touch it. I'd better not do anything with it. Of course, that's considered very masculine, whereas the other might be considered very feminine. So let's just think about this. What's it mean to be masculine? What's it mean to be feminine? And what time do you switch your roles? We'll leave it there for now. Remember, be good people and do good things. And we're rolling right through this chapter. This was episode 1. Got episode 2 coming up. Check it out and reach out if you need anything. Be good people and do good things.